Imagine the rustle of silk gowns at a grand ball, the glitter of diamonds under crystal chandeliers, the stifling expectations of high society in the Gilded Age, a world where a young woman's ultimate destiny was often measured by the prestige of her marriage. I'll now picture another scene entirely: the quiet hum of a laboratory, the meticulous precision of scientific instruments, the relentless pursuit of knowledge in a field dominated entirely by men. What if I told you these two worlds collided in the most unexpected of ways? This is the extraordinary true story of the debutantes who traded society pages for research papers, who chose microscopes over marriage proposals, and who dared to redefine what it meant to be a woman of privilege and purpose. In an era when a woman's highest aspiration was often considered a brilliant match, these brilliant minds sought something far more lasting than a title or a fortune. They sought discovery. They exchanged the tight, laced confines of corsets for the expansive possibilities of test tubes, navigating a path fraught with resistance, ridicule, and relentless determination. Join me on a journey back to a time of opulence and innovation, scandal and science, where the most unlikely of heroines stepped out of the ballroom and into the laboratory. We'll uncover their struggles, their triumphs, and the legacy they left behind, one that resonates powerfully even today. This isn't just a story about science or society. It's about the courage to defy expectations and the relentless curiosity that drives human progress. You're about to meet the daring women who refused to be confined by the glittering cages of their time, and in doing so, changed the world in ways no one could have imagined. To truly understand the magnitude of their choice, we must first appreciate the world they were born into. The Gilded Age, stretching from the late 1800s into the early 20th century, was an era of dizzying opulence for America's elite. It was a world built on new industrial fortunes, where extravagant mansions lined Fifth Avenue and summer cottages in Newport rivaled European palaces. For the young women of these families, life was a carefully choreographed performance. From a very early age, their futures were meticulously mapped out, a path with one ultimate, glittering destination: the marriage market. A girl's social debut was her grand opening. The debutante ball was far more than a party. It was a formal presentation to society, a signal that she was now available for courtship. It was a ritual steeped in tradition, from the exact shade of white for her gown to the precise number of ostrich feathers in her hair. Every aspect was designed to showcase her family's wealth and her own suitability as a bride for a scion of another powerful dynasty. Success was measured by the prestige of the proposal she secured. Her value was intrinsically linked to whom she married. Her purpose was to be a charming hostess, a dutiful wife, and a bearer of heirs, a living ornament in a gilded cage. Intellectual pursuits were, at best, a graceful hobby to be abandoned after marriage. A woman might dabble in music or sketching, but a serious, all-consuming passion for something like chemistry or biology, that was viewed as peculiar, even unseemly. It suggested a mind that was too active, too independent, traits that were considered distinctly unattractive in a potential wife. The educational opportunities available to them were often superficial, designed to produce cultured companions, not critical thinkers. The very idea of a woman pursuing a career, let alone one in the hard sciences, was almost incomprehensible. It was a direct rejection of the social contract they were born to fulfill. Yet, against this backdrop of corsets and cotillions, a quiet rebellion was stirring. A handful of young women, blessed with privilege, but also cursed with a burning, unquenchable curiosity, began to look at their prescribed futures and find them wanting. They listened to the gossip of the ballroom, but dreamed of the theories discussed in university halls. They found the scrutiny of society pages far less compelling than the scrutiny of a specimen under a microscope. For them, the greatest scandal wasn't a mismanaged love affair. It was the audacious notion that a woman's mind could hunger for more than social conquest, that she could choose a life of the mind over a life of merely managing a household. They didn't want to just inherit wealth. They wanted to create knowledge. Among this new generation of quietly rebellious women, few embody the spirit of defiance and discovery quite like Florence Bascom. While many of her contemporaries were being presented at court or attending endless rounds of teas, Florence was developing a profound fascination with the ancient, silent language of the earth itself, geology. Her story is a powerful testament to how the right encouragement, even within a restrictive society, can ignite a brilliant mind. Florence was not entirely outside the system. She was born into privilege as the daughter of a professor and a suffragist, a combination that proved to be incredibly formative. Her father, John Bascom, was a professor at Williams College and later the president of the University of Wisconsin, and he held the radical belief that his daughter's intellects were just as worthy of cultivation as any son's. In the Bascom household, dinner table conversation likely revolved around philosophy and academic debate, not just the latest society gossip. This environment was her first laboratory, one where curiosity was rewarded and critical thinking was a family value. This foundation gave her the confidence to pursue higher education at a time when it was still a novelty for women. She earned her bachelor's and master's degrees from the University of Wisconsin, but her ambitions stretched far beyond. She set her sights on the prestigious Johns Hopkins University for her doctorate, an institution that did not officially admit women, but privilege, when paired with determination, can sometimes pick locks that remain closed to others. Through her father's influential connections, she was granted a special allowance to attend classes, though with humiliating conditions that perfectly illustrate the barriers of the era. She was required to sit behind a large screen during lectures so as not to distract the male students. She was, in essence, permitted to listen and learn, but not to be seen. Can you imagine the sheer force of will it took to absorb complex geological theories from behind a literal barrier, to be treated as an auditory specter in a room full of your peers? Yet for Florence, the opportunity to access that knowledge was worth the indignity. She understood that getting her foot in the door, even if it was hidden behind a screen, was the first crucial step. Her research was nothing short of groundbreaking. She became a pioneering force in the field of petrography, the study of rocks in thin sections under a microscope. She didn't just look at mountains. She unraveled their microscopic secrets, mapping the complex geological history of the Appalachian Mountains with a precision that earned the deep respect of her male colleagues. In 1893, she made history herself, becoming the first woman to ever receive a PhD in geology from Johns Hopkins University. Her degree was more than a personal achievement. It was a crack in the foundation of the entire academic establishment. Florence Bascom didn't stop there. She went on to become the first woman hired by the United States Geological Survey and founded the geology department at Bryn Mawr College, a women's institution where she could nurture the next generation of female scientists without any screens to hide behind. She mentored dozens of women, creating a powerful pipeline of female geologists who would go on to shape the field. She proved that a debutante's mind could not only comprehend the age of the Earth, but could also fundamentally advance our understanding of it. Florence Bascom's doctoral degree was not an end but a beginning, a key that unlocked a door few women had ever approached. Her expertise in petrography, the meticulous science of studying rock crystals under a microscope, quickly made her a sought after authority. This led to her next monumental achievement, an appointment as a geologist with the United States Geological Survey. She was the first woman ever to be given such a role, and her work there would cement her legacy not just as a pioneer, but as one of the nation's most capable earth scientists. Her contributions to the USGS were immense and foundational. For over 2 decades, she was a central figure in mapping the geology of the United States, authoring detailed and authoritative reports on the crystalline rock formations of the Appalachian Mountains. Her maps and analyses were so precise and insightful that they became essential references for other geologists, male and female alike. She didn't just participate. She helped define the very standards of the field. Her focus on the intricate details of mineral composition and rock structure advanced the entire discipline of crystallography, providing a clearer window into the planet's deep history. Yet, even as her professional stature grew, the reality of gender discrimination was a constant presence. While her male colleagues conducted extensive fieldwork, she was often relegated to the laboratory. This was not due to a lack of ability or desire on her part, but because of the entrenched belief that a woman traveling alone to remote, rugged areas was simply improper and unseemly. The scientific establishment found it easier to accept a woman's brilliant mind in a controlled setting than to grant her the full freedom of a field researcher. She navigated these constraints with characteristic pragmatism, turning perceived limitations into strengths. Her lab became her field site, and her microscope her most powerful tool for exploration. Perhaps her most enduring impact, however, was her unwavering commitment to lifting up other women. At Bryn Mawr College, where she founded the geology department, she didn't just teach, she built a powerhouse. She designed a program that was rigorously scientific, refusing to water down the curriculum for her female students. She knew they had to be better, more prepared, and more knowledgeable than their male counterparts to even be considered equals. Her expectations were famously high, and her students adored her for it. She created a supportive enclave where women could debate, discover, and thrive without apology. This mentorship extended far beyond the classroom. She actively placed her most promising graduates into positions at the USGS and other institutions, creating a network of highly trained female geologists that became known as the Bryn Mawr Mafia. These women went on to have distinguished careers of their own, ensuring that Florence's influence would ripple through generations of science. She proved that one woman's success could be leveraged to open the door for dozens more, transforming a personal triumph into a collective advancement. Her laboratory was not just a place of individual discovery, it was an incubator for a movement. While Florence Bascom was decoding the history of the earth, another brilliant mind was turning her gaze to the heavens. Eleanor Elmer Wood's story offers a different but equally compelling path from the ballroom to the observatory. Unlike Florence, who had the advantage of an academic family, Eleanor was born directly into the heart of New York's elite society. She was the daughter of a wealthy stockbroker and was expected to follow the well-worn path of a society wife. She made her debut, attended the parties, and navigated the intricate social scene that defined her class. But for Eleanor, the glittering whirl of society life left her intellectually unfulfilled. The conversations felt trivial, the pursuits hollow. She possessed a mind that craved precision, order, and the profound silence of cosmic wonder. Her opportunity for escape arrived through a remarkable project at Harvard College Observatory. In the late 1800s, the observatory's director, Edward Charles Pickering, was drowning in an ocean of glass. He had amassed an unprecedented collection of photographic plates of the night sky, each plate containing thousands upon thousands of stars. The task of analyzing them was monumental, far too vast for his small staff of male astronomers. In a move born of both necessity and a flicker of progressive thinking, he decided to hire women to do the painstaking work of measuring, cataloging, and classifying the stars. He famously declared that his maid could do a better job than his male assistants, and he set out to prove it. He recruited well-educated women from the Boston area, often from respected families, offering them a chance to work in science for a fraction of a man's salary. This team became known as the Harvard Computers, and it was here that Eleanor Elmer Wood found her true calling. She joined not as an accredited astronomer, but as one of these volunteer computers, a term used for someone who performed mathematical computations. Her work was methodical and demanded extreme patience. Day after day, she would sit at a desk, a magnifying glass in hand, carefully examining two photographic plates of the same star field taken on different nights. Her sharp eyes would scan for any tiny point of light that had changed in brightness or position, a variable star or a nova. This was needle in a haystack work of the highest order, but for a woman like Eleanor, it was infinitely more rewarding than planning the next dinner party. Her natural aptitude and dedication quickly set her apart. She didn't just complete her assigned tasks, she began to innovate. Eleanor became an expert in the emerging science of astronomical photography, mastering the techniques required to capture and measure starlight on glass plates. She co-developed a new and more precise method for calculating the periods of variable stars that rhythmically brighten and dim over time. This was a crucial contribution, as understanding these cycles helped astronomers determine celestial distances and unravel the life cycles of stars. Her work transitioned from basic computation to genuine, publishable research, and she became a respected member of the American Astronomical Society. Eleanor Elmer Wood's journey demonstrates a different facet of the debutante scientist's reality. She didn't storm the gates of a university to earn a formal degree like Florence Bascom. Instead, she found a side door that had been inadvertently left open, a temporary, low-cost solution to a manpower problem that gifted dozens of brilliant women a chance to touch the stars. She leveraged her education and her painstaking attention to detail, skills honed in a society that valued precision in etiquette, and applied them to the cosmos. She proved that even from a seemingly subordinate position, a woman with drive and intellect could make discoveries that literally expanded our map of the universe. If Florence Bascom found her calling in the silent language of rocks, and Eleanor Elmer Wood in the rhythmic pulse of variable stars, then Annie Jump Cannon was the maestro who learned to hear the symphony of the entire cosmos. Her arrival at the Harvard Observatory marked the beginning of one of the most prolific and transformative careers in the history of astronomy. Cannon did not just join the ranks of the Harvard computers. She became their beating heart and their most brilliant star. Born into a privileged Delaware family, Annie's path to science began not with rebellion, but with encouragement. Her mother, Mary Jump, had fostered her curiosity from a young age, teaching her the constellations in the night sky above their home. This early spark of wonder was fanned into a flame when she attended Wellesley College, one of the pioneering institutions for women's education, where she studied physics and astronomy. Yet, after graduation, the expected path for a woman of her standing beckoned. She returned home, a world where her intellectual ambitions had little outlet. A tragic bout of scarlet fever during this time left her nearly completely deaf, a condition that further isolated her from the conventional social life she was supposed to lead. This personal challenge, however, ultimately sharpened her extraordinary powers of visual concentration, turning a limitation into a profound strength. When she joined Pickering's team in 1896, the project of classifying the stars was in a state of productive chaos. Several women, including Williamina Fleming and Antonia Maury, had already developed competing systems for categorizing stellar spectra, the unique fingerprint of light that reveals a star's temperature, composition, and stage of life. The systems were complex, overlapping, and often contradictory. Annie Jump Cannon was tasked with the impossible, to bring order to the heavens. With a dazzling combination of intuitive genius and relentless focus, she began the work that would define her life. Sitting at her desk, a magnifying glass held to her eye, Cannon would examine the faint spectra on each glass plate. To her, these smudges of starlight were not mere data points. They were characters in a grand cosmic story. Where others saw confusion, she saw a clear and simple sequence. She synthesized the earlier systems into something elegantly straightforward, creating the legendary OBAF-GKM spectral sequence. University students to this day memorize the order with the mnemonic, "Oh, be a fine girl, kiss me," a phrase that unknowingly echoes the casual sexism of the era its creator so masterfully navigated. This wasn't just a taxonomy. It was a revolutionary roadmap that placed stars in a logical order based on temperature, from the blazing blue O types to the cool red M types, fundamentally explaining stellar evolution. Her productivity was nothing short of superhuman, classifying stars at a rate that could reach 300 per hour. She personally cataloged more than 350,000 stars over her lifetime, a feat that earned her a place in the Guinness Book of World Records. The world recognized her brilliance, awarding her honorary doctorates from Oxford and Groningen universities, and making her the first woman to receive an honorary doctorate from Oxford. In 1938, she was appointed the William C. Bond Astronomer at Harvard, a prestigious post that finally, formally, acknowledged what everyone already knew. She was one of the greatest astronomical minds of her generation, man or woman. Their monumental achievements, celebrated today, often obscure the grinding, daily reality of the barriers they confronted. For every door that privilege or persistence managed to crack open, a dozen more remained firmly locked. These women operated within a system meticulously designed to exclude them, facing obstacles that were institutional, financial, and deeply personal. Consider the simple act of entering a space where science happened. Laboratories at most major universities were strictly off limits to women, regarded as male sanctuaries. Even when a brilliant mind like Florence Bascom was grudgingly allowed to study, she was physically segregated, her presence considered a distraction to be hidden behind a screen. This denial of access wasn't just about space. It was a message that their participation was unwelcome and illegitimate. They were often barred from attending the very scientific meetings and conferences where their male colleagues presented papers, shared findings, and built the professional networks essential for career advancement. This forced isolation meant their groundbreaking work risked being overlooked, their voices silenced in the crucial conversations that shaped their fields. The financial injustice they endured was another stark reminder of their second-class status. The Harvard computers, for all their intellectual firepower, were paid just 25 cents an hour, a fraction of what their male counterparts earned. They were classified not as astronomers or scientists, but as mere assistants or computers, titles that deliberately downplayed the sophisticated analytical work they performed. Many, like Eleanor Elmer Wood when she started, were not paid at all, working as volunteers. Their affluent backgrounds, ironically, were both a curse and an enabler. While their personal wealth allowed them the luxury of working without pay, an option not available to women from less privileged circumstances, it also gave institutions a convenient excuse to exploit their labor, arguing they didn't need the money. This systemic underpayment ensured financial dependence and reinforced the idea that their work was a hobby, not a profession worthy of a living wage. Perhaps the most insidious obstacle was the constant, grinding battle for recognition. Their contributions were routinely minimized or outright erased. A common practice was for a male department head or director to take public credit for discoveries made by the women in his employ. Their painstaking work might be published under his name alone, or they might receive a brief, dismissive footnote of thanks while he accepted the accolades. This theft of intellectual property was not seen as theft at all. It was simply the accepted order of things. For years, Annie Jump Cannon's revolutionary stellar classification system was often presented to the world as an achievement of the Harvard Observatory, with Pickering's name attached, slowly erasing the sheer individual genius it required. They had to fight not only to make their discoveries, but also to simply claim ownership of them. The emotional toll of this constant resistance cannot be overstated. They faced ridicule from society at large, skepticism from scientific peers, and often quiet disappointment from their own families who couldn't understand why they would choose such a difficult, unladylike path. Every achievement had to be twice as good, every argument twice as sound, just to be considered half as valid. They persevered not because the path was easy, but because their drive to understand the universe, whether locked in a rock, etched on a glass plate, or written in the stars, was a compulsion stronger than the society that sought to confine them. This paradoxical blend of privilege and prejudice defined their daily reality. Their wealth did provide undeniable advantages, offering resources that were utterly out of reach for most women of the era. A young woman from a prominent family might have access to extensive private libraries filled with scientific texts, the latest journals from Europe, and even well-equipped home laboratories if her father or brothers had a passing interest in the sciences. Private tutors could be hired to provide instruction in advanced mathematics or natural philosophy, a level of education far beyond the decorative arts taught at finishing schools. These resources planted the initial seeds of curiosity, allowing a future scientist to educate herself long before a university would even consider her application. Furthermore, the intricate web of family connections and social standing could sometimes be leveraged to apply immense pressure on reluctant institutions. A father who was a wealthy donor to a university or a friend of a powerful trustee could occasionally force open a door that was legally and socially barred. This is precisely how Florence Bascom gained entry to Johns Hopkins. It was the influence of her well-connected academic father that persuaded the administration to make an exception, however begrudgingly. In a world governed by social hierarchy, their names held a certain currency that could, at times, purchase an opportunity. Yet, this very privilege made their choices all the more shocking and, to their peers, utterly incomprehensible. For a working-class woman to seek employment was a necessity, but for a society heiress to choose a career was a profound betrayal of her class. It was seen as a rejection of the entire social contract that governed their world, a contract that promised power and influence in exchange for adhering to strict, unwritten rules. Their families had invested immense sums in their debuts, their wardrobes, and their cultivation as ornaments of high society, all with the goal of securing a powerful alliance through marriage. To then turn away from that investment and pursue something as unglamorous as geology or astronomy was viewed as not just strange, but wasteful and deeply ungrateful. The scandal was not about morality, but about purpose. Their pursuit of science was a silent but devastating critique of the lives their mothers and grandmothers had led. It implied that a life spent managing households, hosting parties, and producing heirs was somehow insufficient for a mind that craved more. This perceived rejection caused intense personal friction within their own families, leading to tensions that were often more painful than the institutional barriers they faced. They were accused of bringing embarrassment and notoriety to their family names, of scaring off potential suitors, and of selfishly prioritizing their own obscure interests over the duty to their lineage. Their wealth gave them a platform, but it also raised the stakes of their rebellion, turning their personal passion into a public act of defiance that reverberated through the glittering ballrooms they left behind. For a woman with scientific ambitions in the late 19th century, the path to an education was a strategic navigation of the few opportunities available. The doors to most elite universities like Harvard, Yale, and Princeton were firmly locked. In response to this exclusion, a parallel system of higher learning emerged, the Women's College. Institutions like Vassar, Wellesley, Smith, and Bryn Mawr became sanctuaries for intellectual curiosity, offering a curriculum that was, in many cases, just as rigorous as that of their male-only counterparts. These colleges were founded on the radical principle that the female mind was capable of serious academic work, and their science programs were particularly strong. They built well-equipped laboratories, hired dedicated faculty, and created an environment where a young woman's interest in chemistry or physics was not just tolerated, but actively encouraged. This, however, was only the first step. A bachelor's degree from a women's college was a powerful foundation, but it was often a ceiling in itself. The next hurdle, the pursuit of an advanced degree, was where the real barriers became apparent. Doctoral programs were the gatekeepers of the professional scientific world, and they were almost universally housed within universities that refused to admit women. The struggle was not merely about acquiring knowledge. It was about earning the credentials that would force the wider academic community to take their work seriously. A woman could be a brilliant researcher, but without a PhD. Her findings could be easily dismissed as the work of a talented amateur. Some, like the determined Margaret Maltby, pursued a strategy of going abroad. Maltby earned her bachelor's from Vassar College and then faced the limited options in the United States. She traveled to Germany, a world leader in scientific research, and after overcoming significant bureaucratic resistance, earned her doctorate in physics from the University of Göttingen in 1895, becoming one of the first American women to receive a PhD. In the field, this path required not just intellectual brilliance, but also significant personal wealth and a tolerance for immense cultural and logistical challenges. Others, like the astronomer Sarah Frances Whiting at Wellesley, chose a different route. Denied the chance to earn an advanced degree herself, she dedicated her career to building a powerhouse physics and astronomy program at Wellesley, ensuring that her students would be so exceptionally trained that they could not be ignored. She brought the first X-ray equipment to the United States for educational purposes, giving her students hands-on experience with the most cutting-edge technology of the day. The battle did not end with a diploma, even an advanced one. Professional recognition was a constant fight. Scientific societies, which were essential for publishing papers and networking, often barred women from membership. For years, the prestigious American Astronomical Society refused to admit female astronomers, meaning that the groundbreaking work of the Harvard computers had to be presented by their male supervisor, Edward Pickering. The very language of academia was used to marginalize them. They were assistants and computers, never astronomers or geologists, titles reserved for men. This systemic denial of professional status was a way to contain their influence, to ensure that even as they produced world-class science, they remained in a supportive, subordinate role rather than being acknowledged as leaders in their fields. The education they received at places like Vassar and Wellesley gave them the tools, but the fight to use those tools on an equal footing would define their entire careers. The very clothes these women wore became a daily, tangible symbol of the conflict between their old lives and their new ambitions. Stepping into a laboratory required not just a shift in mindset, but a literal change in uniform. Picture the absurdity of the situation. attempting to precisely measure a chemical reagent or adjust the delicate focus of a microscope while constrained by a tightly laced corset designed to cinch the waist to an 18-inch ideal. The voluminous, heavy skirts of the era, often made of silk or wool, were a constant hazard, threatening to knock over beakers of acid or sweep delicate instruments from a lab bench with a single misstep. Elaborate towering hairstyles, piled high and secured with countless pins, were not only impractical, but also a genuine fire risk when working near the open flames of Bunsen burners. For these pioneering scientists, fashion was not a frivolous concern. It was an operational challenge that demanded a solution. Some chose a path of quiet adaptation, modifying their existing wardrobes for greater functionality. A woman might wear a simpler, sturdier wool skirt that brushed the floor to avoid tripping, or she might discreetly loosen her corset laces in the privacy of the lab, trading the dictated silhouette of the hourglass for the freedom to take a full, deep breath needed for concentration. They would often protect their expensive day dresses with large, plain aprons, shielding the fabric from spills and stains that would be difficult to explain to a society matron later at tea. These small acts of sartorial rebellion were a quiet but powerful declaration of priorities, placing the demands of science above the demands of fashion. Inevitably, these practical choices drew notice and criticism. To the outside world, a woman's appearance was a direct reflection of her character and her family's status. A disheveled hemline, a missing bustle, or a simple, unadorned hairstyle could be interpreted as a sign of eccentricity, neglect, or even moral failing. Their peers in the lab, almost exclusively men who wore functional trousers and lab coats, could simply hang their streetwear on a hook and get to work. These women, however, carried the weight of social expectation on their shoulders every single day, their clothing a constant reminder that they were operating in a space never designed for them. The raised eyebrows and whispered comments from more conventional members of society were a constant background hum, a social tax they paid for the privilege of doing their work. It was one more way in which their presence in science was scrutinized and policed, proving that even the fabric of their dresses could become a subject of scandal. For many of these brilliant women, the most intimate and painful battles were not fought in university halls or observatories, but around their own family dinner tables. The choice to pursue science ignited reactions that spanned a vast emotional spectrum, from quietly proud encouragement to utter, horrified disbelief. This deeply personal divide often fell along generational and gender lines within the family itself. A father, particularly one with his own academic or professional interests, might see his daughter's sharp mind as a point of pride, a legacy of intellect he could nurture. He might provide her with books, telescopes, or even a small home laboratory, seeing her not as a future society wife, but as a worthy heir to his own curiosity. Florence Bascom's story is the prime example of this dynamic. Her father's unwavering support was the essential bedrock upon which her entire career was built. He saw her potential not as a social liability, but as a human asset to be developed. Conversely, mothers and aunts, the very women who had successfully navigated the intricate rules of high society, often viewed this path with profound anxiety and even shame. Their entire world was built on the premise that a woman's security and status were achieved through a successful marriage. A daughter who was more interested in algebraic equations than guest lists, who preferred the company of fossil specimens to potential suitors, was seen as willfully jeopardizing her entire future. They worried incessantly about marriage prospects. What respectable scion of a good family would want a wife who could debate mineralogy? Who would be intimidated by a woman whose intellect overshadowed his own? This wasn't just a difference of opinion. It was a fundamental clash of values, pitting the old world's definition of success against a new, frighteningly uncertain one. Even for those with supportive families, the pressure to maintain a facade of normalcy was immense. Many of these scientists became masters of an exhausting double life. By day, they were rigorous researchers, their minds focused on complex data and detailed observations. But by evening, they were often expected to seamlessly slip back into their roles as dutiful daughters and society women, presiding over family dinners, attending obligatory social functions, and managing household affairs. This constant code switching drained time and energy that their male colleagues could pour entirely into their work. A male geologist could return from a field trip, exhausted and devoted to writing up his findings. A female geologist would return to a stack of social correspondence to answer and a household to help manage. This burden of domestic obligation was a weight their male peers never had to carry. A married male scientist had a wife to manage his home, raise his children, and shield him from domestic distractions, freeing him to focus solely on his career. A female scientist, however, especially if she eventually married and had children, faced an impossible dichotomy. She was expected to be the flawless manager of the household and the attentive mother, roles that are all-consuming in themselves, while also trying to maintain the intense focus and long hours required for groundbreaking research. This immense, invisible labor, the planning, the emotional upkeep of a family, the social calendar was a second, unpaid career that ran parallel to their scientific pursuits. Their achievements are all the more staggering when we consider that they were often accomplished not in quiet, dedicated isolation, but in the stolen moments between societal and familial duties, a testament to a level of determination and multitasking that is truly awe-inspiring. The scientific establishment's resistance was a formidable fortress these women had to besiege with every publication and every discovery. Gaining entry to a laboratory or earning a degree was only the first skirmish. The lifelong war was for professional legitimacy, for the right to be heard and credited as an equal within their chosen field. This systemic exclusion was meticulously engineered through professional societies, which functioned as the exclusive gentlemen's clubs of academia. For decades, institutions like the American Chemical Society and the Geological Society of America barred women from membership. This was not a minor social snub. It was a professional death sentence. Membership was the gateway to presenting research at conferences, publishing in prestigious journals, and building the collaborative networks that fueled scientific careers. A woman could make a monumental discovery, but without a male colleague willing to present her findings on her behalf, her work would remain trapped in obscurity, invisible to the very community it sought to influence. This practice of requiring a male intermediary was a common and deeply humiliating reality. The brilliant astronomer William Fleming who discovered the Horsehead Nebula and classified over 10,000 stars, had her groundbreaking work routinely presented to the world by Edward Pickering. While he often credited her in the text, the public face of the discovery was undeniably male, reinforcing the perception that women were capable assistants, but not intellectual leaders. This erasure of individual genius was a powerful tool for maintaining the status quo. It allowed the scientific community to benefit from the torrent of data and analysis produced by these women, while simultaneously denying them the accolades and authority that would have forced a reckoning with their capabilities. Their minds were a valuable natural resource to be mined, but never celebrated, even when their work was so undeniably brilliant that it could not be ignored. The recognition was often grudgingly qualified or redirected. The case of Annie Jump Cannon is again instructive. Her stellar classification system was so logically perfect that it became the universal standard. Yet for years, it was referred to as the Harvard system, subtly attributing the achievement to the institution and its male director rather than to the woman who spent decades perfecting it. The ultimate professional insult was the phenomenon of the so-called Matilda effect, a term coined by historian Margaret Rossiter to describe the systematic way in which women's contributions to science are overlooked and credit is attributed to their male collaborators. This wasn't just a few isolated incidents. It was a pervasive pattern that ensured a woman's legacy would be routinely folded into that of a man. Confronted by these brick walls of bias, these pioneering scientists had to become strategic architects of their own careers. They learned to cultivate powerful male allies like Pickering or Bascom's father, who could act as amplifiers for their voices. They founded their own scholarly networks and publications when the establishment's doors remained closed. They focused on building unassailable expertise, recognizing that a reputation for flawless, meticulous work was one of the few forms of currency that could, eventually, command a sliver of respect. Their struggle for legitimacy was a constant, exhausting performance, a demand to be twice as good for half the credit, a battle fought not with outbursts, but with an inexhaustible supply of patience, precision, and irrefutable data. They understood that in a world designed to silence them, the most powerful argument was a discovery so significant it simply could not be dismissed. The stark reality of financial dependence was a cage far more confining than any social expectation. For these women, the pursuit of science was not just an intellectual challenge. It was a constant, grinding financial negotiation. The academic world they were trying to enter was structured around paid positions, research grants, and professional salaries. A system designed by men, for men, and one that systematically excluded them from its economic benefits. They were expected to produce world-class research, but the pathway to earning a living wage from that work was almost non-existent. Consider the brutal arithmetic of the Harvard Observatory. The women known as the Harvard computers were performing some of the most sophisticated analytical work in astronomy, yet they were classified as mere clerical staff. Their pay was set at 25 cents per hour, a rate that was barely a living wage for the time and a fraction of what the male assistants, who often performed less complex tasks, were paid. For many, like the early volunteers, there was no salary at all. Their work was deemed worthy of experience, but not worthy of compensation. This was justified by the pervasive and patronizing assumption that these women, often from well-to-do families, were working for personal enrichment rather than financial necessity. Their privilege was used as a weapon against them, an excuse to exploit their intellects while denying them the economic independence that would have cemented their professional status. This financial precarity forced them into impossible choices. A woman might have to abandon her research entirely if her family's financial situation changed, or if they withdrew their support in disapproval of her career. Others, determined to continue, had to rely on the generosity of male relatives or husbands who were willing to underwrite their scientific pursuits. This created a new form of dependence, trading the financial control of a father for that of a husband, which could be withdrawn at any moment. It was a precarious existence where a woman's life's work could be jeopardized by a shift in family finances or sentiment. For those without a family fortune to fall back on, the options were even more limited. They were often funneled into teaching positions at women's colleges, which provided a noble and vital outlet for their knowledge, but were notoriously poorly funded. A professor at a school like Wellesley or Bryn Mawr earned a fraction of the salary of her counterpart at Harvard or Yale. These positions, while intellectually fulfilling, offered little financial security and even less time or resources for personal research. The very institutions that educated them became, in a way, another kind of gilded cage, a place where they could inspire the next generation, but often at the cost of their own potential for discovery. They were building the ladder for others to climb, even if it meant they themselves could climb no higher. This systemic financial disenfranchisement had a chilling effect on the entire scientific landscape. How many brilliant minds were lost because a woman could not afford to work for free? How many potential discoveries never happened because the researcher had to abandon her post to marry for financial security or take a job entirely outside of science to support herself? The careers of these pioneers were not linear paths of progression. They were fragile ecosystems, constantly threatened by a lack of funding, and their survival depended on a combination of personal wealth, familial tolerance, and sheer, stubborn refusal to quit. Their scientific contributions are all the more remarkable when we understand that they were made not with institutional support, but in spite of a system designed to ensure they would never be paid what they were truly worth. The social cost of their ambition was steep and publicly displayed in the merciless court of public opinion. Stepping outside the rigid boundaries of feminine propriety invited a storm of gossip and ridicule that could tarnish a family's name. Newspapers and society magazines, which chronicled every detail of the elite's lives, often turned their pens against these intellectual women, portraying their passions as bizarre quirks, or worse, as a fundamental failure of character. A woman who could expertly analyze spectral lines or identify mineral specimens was not celebrated for her intellect. She was more likely to be labeled an eccentric, a term that gently masked a harsher judgment of her being somehow unnatural or unwell. This criticism frequently homed in on the most personal aspects of their lives, questioning their very fitness for the role society had decreed were their ultimate purpose, wife and mother. Whispers circulated at parties and in parlors. What man would want a bride who spent her days with her eyes glued to a microscope? Could a woman capable of such deep, rational thought possibly possess the softness and emotional warmth required to nurture a family? Her dedication to her work was cynically framed as a rejection of domesticity itself, a selfish choice that placed obscure intellectual pursuits above her sacred duty to home and hearth. This created a cruel double bind. To be a successful scientist, she had to be fiercely dedicated, but that very dedication was cited as proof that she was unfit for the life she was supposedly neglecting. For many, this constant scrutiny created an isolating loneliness. They existed in a social no man's land, too intellectual for the traditional socialites who discussed fashion and engagements, and yet, as women, often still excluded from the full camaraderie of the male scientific community. Their resolve, however, became their armor. Many learned to wear the label of eccentric as a badge of honor, a signal that they had successfully freed themselves from the exhausting need for society's approval. This subtle rebranding was a powerful act of defiance. By embracing the very terms used to mock them, they drained the words of their power to hurt and carved out a new identity, one where being a serious thinker was a point of pride, not a social liability. Their unshakable commitment to their work, in the face of such relentless personal criticism, stands as a testament to a courage that was every bit as profound as their intellectual achievements. Yet their legacy is measured not in the obstacles they faced, but in the monumental contributions they made in spite of them. While the men of their era often received the public accolades for grand theories and sweeping conclusions, it was frequently the women who did the foundational, painstaking labor that made those leaps of understanding possible. They were the master cartographers of the natural world, meticulously creating the maps and charts that others would use to navigate new scientific territories. Consider the sheer scale of the work undertaken by the Harvard computers. Their primary task was to impose order on the chaotic splendor of the night sky, one glass photographic plate at a time. Each plate contained thousands of tiny stellar images, each one requiring individual measurement and classification. This was not mindless, busy work. It was an act of profound creation. They were building the first comprehensive census of the cosmos, categorizing hundreds of thousands of stars by their brightness, color, and spectral signature. Annie Jump Cannon's OBAFGKM system was more than a clever acronym. It was a revolutionary organizing principle that revealed the life cycle of stars, allowing astronomers to understand stellar evolution for the first time. Her work and that of her colleagues provided the raw data that enabled later astronomers like Edwin Hubble to make his groundbreaking discoveries about the expansion of the universe. The most famous cosmological breakthroughs of the 20th century literally rest on the measurements made by these women's hands. In the earth sciences, Florence Bascom's impact was equally foundational. Her detailed geological maps of the Appalachian Mountains were feats of precision and insight. She didn't just draw lines on paper. She decoded the complex, billion-year-old history of mountain building, erosion, and geological upheaval written in the rock formations. Her maps became the essential reference for anyone studying the region, guiding generations of geologists searching for mineral deposits, understanding earthquake risks, or simply seeking to comprehend the planet's dynamic past. Her work for the United States Geological Survey set a new standard for accuracy and detail, and her focus on petrography using the microscope to study rock crystals elevated the entire field, providing a new lens through which to understand the very building blocks of the continents. Their contributions often extended into astonishingly diverse areas of science and technology. Astronomer Williamina Fleming, while classifying stars, also discovered the Horsehead Nebula, one of the most iconic and photographed celestial objects. Physicist and chemist Ellen Swallow Richards, the first woman admitted to MIT, became a pioneer of sanitary engineering and founded the entirely new field of home economics, applying scientific principles to nutrition, food safety, and clean water, a public health revolution that saved countless lives. Astronomer Henrietta Swan Leavitt, another Harvard computer, discovered the crucial relationship between the luminosity and the period of Cepheid variable stars. This relationship, now known as Leavitt's law, became the most important yardstick for measuring cosmic distances, the key that finally allowed astronomers to measure the size of our galaxy and the vast distances to others. Her discovery was arguably one of the most significant in all of 20th century astronomy, yet she was paid a pittance for her work and received little recognition during her lifetime. The depth and breadth of their achievements prove that their intellects were not confined to narrow specialties, but were capable of the kind of transformative thinking that reshapes our entire understanding of the world and our place within it. Their legacy, however, was never just about the data they compiled or the theories they advanced. It was about the profound and permanent crack they made in the ceiling for all those who would follow. These women understood that individual brilliance was not enough to dismantle a system built to exclude them. To create lasting change, they had to become institution builders, mentors, and a powerful, supportive network for the next generation of women who dared to choose knowledge over convention. Their most enduring experiment was in creating a new ecosystem for female scientists to thrive. Florence Bascom's geology department at Bryn Mawr stands as the ultimate example of this. She didn't just lecture. She crafted a rigorous, demanding program designed to make her students so exceptionally qualified that the outside world could not ignore them. She knew the harsh truth that her female graduates would be held to a far higher standard than their male counterparts from Ivy League schools, and she prepared them for that reality with unflinching rigor. But her mentorship extended far beyond the classroom. She actively worked to place her top students in professional positions, writing glowing recommendations and leveraging her hard-won reputation to vouch for their capabilities. She created what became known as the Bryn Mawr Mafia, a powerful and loyal network of female geologists who supported each other's careers, shared opportunities, and advanced through the ranks of the U.S. Geological Survey and academia together. She turned her own hard-fought credibility into a ladder for others to climb. A similar, though less formal, network blossomed around the Harvard computers. While their official titles were lowly, their collective intellect formed a critical mass of expertise that became indispensable to astronomy. Women like Annie Jump Cannon, Williamina Fleming, and Antonia Mori may have been hired as individuals, but they quickly became a collaborative force, teaching each other, challenging each other's methods, and creating a supportive intellectual community within the confines of the observatory. They demonstrated the power of women working together to elevate each other's work, proving that even without official power, they could still shape the direction of a scientific field through sheer competence and solidarity. Their very presence in these spaces, no matter how contested, began the slow, painstaking work of changing attitudes. Every time a male professor saw a woman like Florence Bascom deliver a flawless analysis of a rock formation, every time a skeptical astronomer had to concede that Annie Jump Cannon's classification system was superior to any other, it chipped away at the preconceived notion that women were intellectually unsuited for science. They forced the scientific establishment to gradually, reluctantly, expand its definition of who a scientist could be. They became living proof that the qualities required for great science, curiosity, patience, precision, and intellectual courage, were not masculine traits, but human ones. This cultural shift created a ripple effect that reached far beyond the laboratory walls. For young girls growing up at the turn of the century, reading a newspaper article about a woman earning a doctorate or discovering a new star was a powerful and subversive act. It presented a new script for a woman's life, one that included possibilities far beyond the ballroom. They became role models not because they sought the spotlight, but because their achievements were simply too significant to hide. Their lives offered a silent, powerful argument that a woman could be both brilliant and accomplished, that she could have a mind of her own and use it to leave a permanent mark on the world. They transformed the image of a scientist from a lone male genius in an ivory tower into something more diverse and more true, a community of dedicated minds, and among them, finally, were women. For these women, the decision to dedicate their lives to science often came with a deeply personal cost, one that reshaped their most intimate relationships and defied the most fundamental expectations of their era. In a world that measured a woman's success by her wedding ring and the number of children she bore, their life's work became their primary partner, their most consuming passion. This led many to a stark crossroads, forcing a choice between the traditional path of marriage and family or the all but unprecedented one of a professional career. A significant number, like the prolific Annie Jump Cannon, never married at all. For them, the relentless demands of their research, the long hours in the lab, the field work, the singular focus required were incompatible with the immense responsibilities of running a household and raising children as society expected. They consciously exchanged one kind of legacy for another, choosing to leave their mark on the world through discovery rather than through lineage. This was not a rejection of companionship, but a pragmatic calculation of time and energy. A married woman's life, especially one of their social standing, was expected to be a whirlwind of social obligations, management of servants, and the emotional labor of being a society hostess. Adding a scientific career on top of that was a near impossible feat. By remaining single, they freed themselves from these domestic burdens, granting themselves the precious hours and mental space their male colleagues took for granted. Their spinsterhood was not a lonely fate to be pitied, but a strategic, often deliberate, choice for autonomy. It was a declaration that their intellectual offspring, their published papers, their classified stars, their mapped geological formations, were a sufficient and worthy legacy. Yet, for a fortunate few, a third path emerged, one that was perhaps the most radical of all, a marriage of true minds. These rare partnerships were built on a foundation of mutual respect and shared intellectual passion, where a husband saw his wife's brilliance not as a peculiarity to be tolerated, but as a talent to be celebrated and supported. These men became active collaborators and champions, defying the social norms of the time to create a new model for partnership. The astronomer Henry Norris Russell, a towering figure in the field, was a fervent advocate for his wife, Lucy May Cole, who worked alongside him and was a talented mathematician in her own right. He publicly credited her contributions to his work, a level of acknowledgement that was vanishingly rare. Perhaps the most profound example is found in the life of Marie Curie, though her story unfolds slightly later and across the ocean. Her partnership with Pierre Curie was the stuff of scientific legend. He fought fiercely for her recognition, insisting that credit for their shared discoveries be attributed to both of them. When the Nobel Committee initially planned to award the prize only to Pierre and his male colleague, Pierre protested until Marie's indispensable role was properly acknowledged. This was not merely a supportive husband. This was a true scientific partner who viewed his wife as his absolute equal. While few of the American heiresses may have achieved a collaboration quite so famous, similar dynamics played out in quieter, yet equally significant, ways. A husband might use his own social capital to secure his wife access to a library or laboratory, or he might handle the household management himself to shield her from distraction, consciously inverting the traditional roles of the time. These pioneering unions were a quiet revolution within a revolution, proving that the pursuit of knowledge did not have to be a solitary journey, but could be a shared adventure, a meeting of two intellects dedicated to a common, glorious purpose. This unique position at the crossroads of immense wealth and scientific passion presented a fascinating paradox. While their privileged backgrounds often served as the initial key to unlock the door to education, many of these women soon realized their fortunes could become a far more powerful instrument, a tool to reshape the very landscape of science itself. Denied funding and recognition by the traditional male-dominated establishment, they simply chose to build their own tables rather than wait for a seat at someone else's. A striking example is the astronomer Catherine Wolfe Bruce, a reclusive New York heiress who inherited a vast fortune. Bruce could have lived a life of quiet luxury, utterly detached from the academic world. Instead, she became one of the most important private patrons of astronomy in history. Shocked by the chronic underfunding plaguing the field, she began donating enormous sums with a specific, focused intent to acquire the best possible tools for discovery. She funded the construction of massive, state-of-the-art telescopes and observatories, including the Bruce telescope at the Heidelberg Observatory and the Bruce double astrograph at the Harvard College Observatory, the very instrument the Harvard computers used to make their historic classifications. Her generosity was not a hobby. It was a strategic investment in the infrastructure of discovery, and she specifically sought out projects led by astronomers who were pushing the boundaries of the field, regardless of their institution. Her patronage literally gave astronomers better eyes with which to see the universe. Other women leveraged their social standing to create lasting institutions that would outlive them. They understood that individual generosity was powerful, but systemic change required endowments and foundations. With a shrewd understanding of influence, they would host salons and dinners, not to discuss marriage prospects, but to convince other wealthy families to contribute to the cause of scientific education. They established scholarships specifically for women in science, creating financial lifelines that would allow the next generation to bypass the exploitation they themselves had endured. These funds meant a brilliant young woman no longer had to choose between marrying for financial security and pursuing a research career. She could now afford to choose both or neither on her own terms. Perhaps the most personal use of wealth was in the creation of private laboratories. For a woman barred from university facilities, the solution was breathtakingly simple. She would build a better one in her own home. These were not mere curiosity cabinets. They were fully functioning research centers equipped with the latest microscopes, chemical apparatus, and scientific libraries. Here, in these sanctums of their own creation, they were finally in charge. They could pursue the research that captivated them without asking for permission or fearing ridicule. This direct funding of their own work was the ultimate act of intellectual independence, a declaration that their scientific curiosities were valuable enough to fund with their own inheritance. Their wealth, which had once been a chain linking them to a prescribed social destiny, was melted down and reforged into instruments of liberation bequests that built telescopes, scholarships that opened doors, and private laboratories where a woman could finally, and without apology, dedicate her life to the relentless, glorious pursuit of knowledge. Mastering the intricate dance of high society was a skill in itself, a performance that demanded constant attention to detail, a flawless memory for names and connections, and the ability to converse charmingly on trivial topics for hours. These very skills, however, proved to be a surprising asset in the laboratory. The meticulous attention to detail required to manage a guest list or plan a 12-course dinner translated seamlessly into the precise measurement of chemical reagents or the careful logging of astronomical data. The patience needed to sit through endless teas and balls was the same patience required to spend weeks staring through a microscope at rock-thin sections or tracking the subtle shift of a star's position. They were, in essence, applying the rigorous discipline of their social training to a far more intellectually satisfying pursuit. Yet the mental and emotional toll of navigating these two competing worlds was immense. Their days became exhausting exercises in code switching. A morning might be spent in the silent, focused intensity of the laboratory, her mind fully engaged in solving a complex equation or interpreting a set of data. Then she would have to return home, change into an elaborate afternoon dress, and transform herself completely for a social call, where the conversation would pivot from stellar spectra to the latest Parisian fashions. This constant shifting of mental gears was a burden their male colleagues never had to bear. A male scientist could be fully absorbed in his work, his eccentricities and singular focus often seen as a mark of genius. A female scientist had to maintain a facade of normalcy, ensuring that her scientific passion never betrayed any sign of neglecting her social duties, lest she invite gossip and criticism. This dual existence meant their achievements were often won through sheer, grueling endurance. While a man might work late into the night on his research, a woman of their station would often have to end her scientific work early to preside over a family dinner or attend a musicale. The hours they dedicated to science were, more often than not, stolen hours. They rose before dawn to study. They worked feverishly in the gaps between social obligations, and they sacrificed sleep to read the latest journal. Their progress was not a straight line of focused effort, but a fragmented series of intense, highly disciplined sessions crammed into the margins of a life that was still expected to look conventional from the outside. They weren't just working twice as hard to prove their intellectual worth. They were working twice as hard to maintain the illusion that they weren't working at all, that their scientific pursuits were merely a quaint hobby that in no way interfered with their true purpose in society. This hidden labor, this secret life of the mind, is what makes their monumental contributions all the more extraordinary. Operating under the constant awareness that their work would be judged by a harsher standard, these women developed a culture of meticulousness that became their professional signature. They understood that a single error, no matter how small, could be seized upon as proof that women were inherently unsuited for scientific rigor. This pressure forged an unparalleled commitment to precision, leading many to pioneer methodological innovations that fundamentally improved their field. Their need to be unimpeachable didn't just make them careful, it made them revolutionary. Annie Jump Cannon's work at Harvard provides a perfect example. Classifying stars from faint spectral images on glass plates was an art as much as a science, requiring an intuitive leap to categorize a smudge of light. To ensure her revolutionary system was beyond reproach, she didn't just rely on her own exceptional eyesight. She developed a rigorous process of cross-referencing and verification, often rechecking the same star across multiple plates taken on different nights to confirm its classification. This practice of redundancy and validation, born from a need to armor her conclusions against criticism, became a cornerstone of good astronomical practice, ensuring the data behind the Harvard classification system was rock solid. In the earth sciences, Florence Bascom's approach to geology was similarly transformative. Traditional field geology in the 19th century often relied on broad observations and sweeping conclusions. Bascom, knowing her interpretations would be questioned, introduced a new level of forensic detail. Her pioneering work in petrography, the study of rocks in thin sections under a microscope, meant she could support her large-scale geological maps with microscopic evidence. She didn't just say a rock was a certain type. She could point to the exact arrangement of its mineral crystals as proof. This marriage of macro-scale field observation with micro-scale laboratory analysis became the new gold standard in geological research, adding a layer of empirical evidence that made the entire discipline more rigorous and less susceptible to speculative error. This drive for unassailable accuracy often pushed them to create entirely new tools and techniques. Confronted with a problem for which no adequate instrument existed, they simply invented one. Many of these innovations were born from the very practical constraints of their position. For instance, a woman working in a home laboratory might not have access to the latest expensive equipment from Germany. This necessity became the mother of invention, leading to clever, home-made modifications that were sometimes more effective than the professional tools. A carefully weighted pulley system for a microscope, a refined technique for preparing a rock-thin section, or a more precise mathematical formula for calculating stellar periods. These were the quiet, practical breakthroughs that stemmed from a need to work smarter and more accurately with the resources they had. Their marginalization, in a strange twist, fostered a unique brand of ingenuity that ultimately enriched scientific methodology for everyone. This global network of aristocracy and wealth, often dismissed as mere frivolous social climbing, could unexpectedly serve as a powerful conduit for scientific advancement. While their male counterparts might gain entry to European institutions through formal academic channels, these women often accessed the same halls of learning through the drawing rooms and familial ties of the international elite. A debutante's carefully cultivated connection to a duchess or a countess could, with the right persuasion, evolve into an invitation to visit a private laboratory or an introduction to a prominent professor at a university in Berlin or Paris. These personal referrals carried a weight that a formal letter of inquiry from an unknown American woman simply could not. Consider the experience of an ambitious young geologist from a prominent New York family. Her father's business dealings or her mother's friendship with a British noblewoman could open a door that was otherwise bolted shut. She might secure an opportunity to study a unique mineral collection at the British Museum or spend a summer conducting fieldwork with a team of French geologists, all under the genteel pretense of a cultural tour or a social visit. This access provided something invaluable: exposure to different scientific methodologies, cutting-edge equipment, and intellectual currents that had not yet crossed the Atlantic. They were effectively bypassing the entrenched biases of American academia by leveraging a more fluid and socially aware European scientific community, which, while still male-dominated, occasionally proved more receptive to a well-connected and determined woman of means. Correspondence became another vital lifeline to the wider world of science. The same social grace that enabled a flawless thank you note to a hostess could be parlayed into a meticulously composed letter to a leading expert in paleontology or physics. A woman might send a sample of a peculiar rock formation she had discovered to a specialist in Vienna, accompanied by a letter of introduction from a mutual aristocratic acquaintance. This transformed the transaction from a cold, professional request into a personal favor between social peers, making it far more likely to receive a thoughtful and detailed response. These intellectual pen-pal relationships allowed them to vet their theories, gain feedback on their findings, and stay abreast of the latest developments, creating a private, international academy of their own construction. They built a collaborative network that transcended borders, one elegant, handwritten letter at a time. This international dimension also offered a crucial form of validation that was often denied to them at home. Having a paper published in a European scientific journal or receiving commendation from a respected foreign institution like the Royal Society could instantly elevate their standing. It was far more difficult for a skeptical professor at an American university to dismiss the work of a woman if it was being discussed and praised by eminent scientists in London or Heidelberg. Their social connections provided the initial introduction, but it was the sheer quality of their intellectual contributions that cemented these transatlantic relationships, slowly building a reputation that could eventually force the gates of their own country's scientific establishment to creak open a little wider. This relentless need to exist in two separate realities exacted a heavy psychological price, one that was often hidden behind a polished veneer of composure. Imagine the exhausting mental gymnastics required each day. In the morning, you might be meticulously documenting the spectral class of a distant star, your mind fully immersed in the cold, hard logic of the cosmos. By the afternoon, you are expected to seamlessly transition into a society matron, discussing the merits of different lace patterns or gracefully deflecting questions about your marital prospects. This constant shifting of identities wasn't just inconvenient. It was a form of psychological dissonance, a demand to compartmentalize the most passionate part of oneself for the sake of social acceptance. The act of hiding their achievements became a particularly bitter pill to swallow. In the laboratory, their work was their pride, the product of intense focus and groundbreaking insight. But in the ballroom, that same work had to be minimized, disguised as a harmless hobby, or even denied altogether. A brilliant geological discovery might be brushed off as a mere interest in pretty rocks gathered during a summer holiday. A complex astronomical calculation might be attributed to helping a friend rather than claimed as her own profound intellectual contribution. This self-effacement, forced upon them by societal norms, required a form of self-betrayal. To downplay their life's work was to invalidate their own deepest passions and intellect in the eyes of the very people whose approval they were supposedly seeking. This isolation was profound. They often found themselves without a true peer group. Their scientific colleagues were mostly men who, while they might respect her work, often could not relate to the social pressures she faced. Meanwhile, her social circle, comprised of other women from her class, could not comprehend the intellectual drive that pulled her away from their shared world of teas and tournaments. This left them in a lonely middle ground, belonging wholly to neither world and forced to wear a mask in both. The pressure to maintain this facade of being a perfectly conventional society woman who just happened to dabble in something unusual was a continuous source of silent stress, a performance that never ended. For some, this double life fostered a deep-seated anxiety about their legitimacy. Even as they achieved greatness, the voice of societal judgment could become an internal critic, whispering doubts about their place in the scientific community. Or were they truly scientists? Or were they just privileged amateurs playing at something serious? This imposter syndrome, though never named as such at the time, was a direct product of a culture that constantly questioned their right to be there. Their mental fortitude, then, wasn't just about persevering in their work. It was about continuously fighting a battle within themselves, reinforcing their own self-worth against a tide of external and internalized skepticism. The weight they carried was not just the weight of their research, but the invisible, crushing weight of living a life of profound contradiction. For many, the highest honors arrived only after a lifetime of being overlooked, a bittersweet validation that often came when their most productive years were behind them. This gradual shift was less a sudden awakening and more a slow, grudging capitulation to the undeniable weight of their accomplishments. The scientific establishment, having benefited from their labor for decades, could no longer plausibly ignore their contributions. The first major cracks in the fortress appeared with honorary degrees. These awards were a way for universities to acknowledge greatness without having to confront the more radical idea of admitting women as equal students or faculty during their prime. In 1925, the University of Groningen in the Netherlands awarded an honorary doctorate to Annie Jump Cannon, a momentous event that was followed by an even more groundbreaking honor from Oxford University in 1929. She became the first woman ever to receive an honorary doctorate of science from Oxford, a stunning reversal for an institution that had long been a bastion of male exclusivity. These ceremonies were powerful symbolic gestures, a public admission that her work had fundamentally reshaped humanity's understanding of the universe. Professional societies, the most exclusive gentlemen's clubs in academia, also began to relent under sustained pressure. The American Astronomical Society, after years of barring its female members from presenting their own work, elected Annie Jump Cannon as its first female officer in 1932. This was not a mere honorary title. It was an official role within the organization's governance, a small but significant foothold in the halls of power. Similarly, the Geological Society of America, which had long refused to admit women, finally extended membership to Florence Bascom in 1924. She was not just admitted as a member, she was also elected as the Society's first female officer, serving as vice president in 1930. These positions were a formal institutional recognition that these women were not just assistants, but leaders and peers whose judgment was essential to the advancement of their field. The ultimate and perhaps most personal form of recognition was the rare practice of having a discovery named in their honor. This was the scientific community's highest compliment, an eternal stamp on the map of human knowledge. For the Harvard computers, this often took the form of celestial namesakes. The asteroid 594 Myril was named for Williamina Fleming, while asteroid 112 was named for Henrietta Leavitt. Annie Jump Cannon has an entire class of stars, the Cannon Stars, informally named for her, a tribute to the sheer ubiquity of her classification system. These namings ensured that their legacies would be literally written in the stars, a permanent memorial in the cosmos. They dedicated their lives to understanding. This belated acclaim, while often delayed by decades, served a crucial purpose beyond mere personal validation. It provided a visible, public counterargument to the entrenched bias that women were incapable of high-level scientific work. Every honorary degree, every society membership, and every named discovery became a powerful data point for the next generation, proving that the barriers could be broken and that a woman's work could eventually earn the highest honors the world had to offer. Their impact stretches far beyond their published papers and classified stars, weaving itself into the very fabric of modern science and society. The most immediate and tangible legacy of these trailblazers was the remarkable pipeline of female scientists they personally trained and mentored. Florence Bascom's Bryn Mawr Mafia was not just a clever nickname. It was a strategic and highly effective network that placed a generation of impeccably trained female geologists into positions of influence within the U.S. Geological Survey and academia. These women, in turn, became mentors themselves, creating a powerful multiplier effect that ensured the door Bascom had forced open would never again be completely closed. They proved that one person's success could be leveraged to create a movement, transforming individual achievement into collective, systemic progress. This mentorship model demonstrated a profound truth that resonates in STEM fields to this day. Representation is not merely symbolic, it is instrumental. For a young woman studying geology in the 1930s, seeing a respected figure like Bascom at the front of the lecture hall was a revolutionary act. It provided a living, breathing answer to the question, can I do this? These pioneers became the role models they themselves had lacked. Their very presence in laboratories and university departments serving as a silent but powerful rebuke to the entrenched belief that science was a masculine pursuit. Their careers offered a new, viable life script, one where a woman's value was measured by her contributions to human knowledge rather than by her social connections. On a broader cultural level, their work delivered a devastating blow to the pseudoscientific arguments used to justify gender inequality. For centuries, opponents of women's rights had clung to the notion that the female brain was biologically incapable of handling complex mathematics or abstract reasoning, that their constitutions were too delicate for the rigors of intellectual labor. The towering achievements of women like Cannon, Bascom, and Leavitt made these arguments utterly ridiculous. How could anyone seriously claim women were intellectually inferior when Annie Jump Cannon was categorizing the universe with a speed and accuracy that left her male colleagues in awe? Their genius provided irrefutable evidence that cognitive ability knows no gender, supplying the suffrage and later women's rights movements with powerful ammunition grounded in demonstrable empirical fact. The institutional barriers that once seemed insurmountable began to crumble under the weight of their proven excellence. The honorary degrees, the society memberships, and the prestigious appointments they eventually received were not just personal accolades, they were precedents. Each one set a new standard, making it increasingly difficult for the next generation of universities and professional organizations to justify exclusionary policies. The path they carved, though narrow and difficult at first, became a widening road for those who followed. The first woman to earn a geology degree after Bascom had a slightly easier time of it, and the one after her, easier still, not because the world had become entirely fair, but because a blueprint for success now existed where there had only been a blank wall before. Perhaps their most enduring lesson is a timeless one about the nature of curiosity itself. They proved that the drive to understand our world, to unravel its mysteries and push the boundaries of knowledge, is a fundamentally human impulse, not a gendered one. By refusing to be confined by the glittering cages of their social class, they reclaimed this universal birthright for everyone. Their lives stand as a permanent testament to the idea that passion and perseverance can dismantle even the most rigid expectations, and that the greatest discoveries often come from those audacious enough to look at the world not as it is, but as it could be. From the glittering ballrooms of their youth to the hushed laboratories where they made history, these women undertook a journey far more radical than any geographic expedition. They were intellectual pioneers, mapping uncharted territories of the mind and the natural world, and in doing so, they redrew the boundaries of an entire era. Their true legacy is not merely a list of discoveries, though those are staggering, but the profound and permanent shift they engineered in our collective understanding of human potential. They presented the world with irrefutable evidence that a sharp, analytical mind is not the sole province of one gender, and that the drive to understand our universe is a profoundly human endeavor, not a masculine one. Their stories resonate with a powerful urgency even today, serving as both a beacon of inspiration and a reminder of the work that remains. When a young girl learns about Henrietta Leavitt's key to measuring the cosmos, or when a student uses Florence Bascom's geological maps, they are encountering more than just historical facts. They are touching a lineage of brilliance, connecting to a chain of women who dared to claim science as their rightful domain. This legacy lives on in every woman who pursues a PhD. In physics, every researcher who leads a field study, and every young student who looks through a telescope and feels a sense of belonging. The question of which mind resonates most is a deeply personal one. Perhaps it is the meticulous persistence of Annie Jump Cannon, whose hands classified a universe. Maybe it is the strategic defiance of Florence Bascom, who built an entire academic fortress for women in science. Or it could be the quiet, cosmic revelation of Henrietta Leavitt, whose law of stellar periods unlocked the vast scale of the heavens from a small desk in Cambridge. Each story offers a different lesson in courage, intellect, and resilience. We would love to hear which of these brilliant pioneers speaks to you, whose journey from the ballroom to the laboratory captures your imagination. Share your thoughts in the comments below and join the conversation about these architects of the modern scientific world.